My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 57 years old. Last month, my sons called the police and had me removed from their house. It wasn't loud. No yelling, no slamming doors. Just quiet steps, clipped voices, and the kind of silence that tells you you're no longer welcome. I remember sitting at the breakfast table that morning, the same one where I used to pour juice for them before school. Now I sat alone, staring at the fridge covered in magnets, preschool drawings, and baby photos, but not one of me. There was no photo of me in that entire house. Not in the living room, not in the hall, not even in the spare room where I'd been staying. You would think I was a visitor, not the woman who raised them. They stood at the doorway, Luke with his arms folded, Caleb looking down. Luke's wife stood behind him, holding her phone in case she needed to dial again. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just picked up my bag and walked out. I keep replaying the moment I turned back, not to beg, not to explain, just to see if anyone would meet my eyes. They didn't. I moved in with Luke and his wife after the nonprofit I worked for shut down. I'd been with them nearly 20 years. Finance lead, monthly grants, donor audits. I held it all together like thread in a worn coat. When the funding dried up, so did the promises. 12 of us gone in one email, no warning. I thought I'd take a breath, rest, stay with Luke a while until I figured out what came next. I had savings, nothing flashy, just enough to keep afloat, but I never got the chance to explain that. The day before they made the call, I'd made cinnamon pancakes for breakfast. Caleb had come over with his wife. She smiled but never looked me in the eye. The way you smile at a store clerk, polite but distant. After we ate, I tried to tell them gently. I said I'd lost my job. I said I was thinking of slowing down. Luke's reaction wasn't surprise. It was frustration. He crossed his arms and said this wasn't the right time. His wife was expecting. Caleb was remodeling. They needed space, money, help, but not me. Just what I could give. That's when I saw it. I wasn't part of the family anymore. I was an obligation, a weight they thought they were carrying. That night, I stayed in my room. I didn't sleep. I just watched the hallway light flicker beneath the door. It used to feel warm. Now it just felt like a line I wasn't allowed to cross. When the officers came, I didn't argue. I knew it was legal. I didn't own the house. I just followed the rules, just like I always had. Later, I sat on a bench near the bus stop with my suitcase by my feet. I looked at the screen on my phone. Not one message, not one call. Just a weather update and a news headline I didn't bother reading. I thought about going back, asking for a few more days. But then I remembered the look on Luke's face, the way he nodded like a manager signing off on a task. Like escorting your mother out was just another item on the list. So I didn't go back. I never planned to. Something in me had gone very still, not angry, just done. The table was already set when they walked in. I'd spent the afternoon preparing dinner the way I used to when they were in high school. Herb chicken with honey glaze, pumpkin soup, and the garden salad Luke always picked the croutons out of. It wasn't anything fancy, just food that carried memories. I thought maybe those memories would soften what I needed to say. We ate in quiet for a while. Forks clinked gently against bowls. The only voices came from Caleb's wife asking for salt, and Luke pouring himself a second glass of tea. Once everyone had settled, I cleared my throat and spoke. I said it softly, like I was sharing the weather. I lost my job last week. The nonprofit closed down for good. No one looked up, just the sound of chewing and the scraping of a spoon on porcelain. Then Luke leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and said it flat. So you're just done, just like that, no backup plan. I nodded. I told them I'd done this for over 2 decades. Maybe it was time to step back, rest a little. I didn't expect applause, but I didn't expect silence either. Luke's voice tightened. He said his wife was due in a month. Daycare was outrageous. Insurance was a mess. He asked how I could possibly think now was the right time to stop working. His tone made it sound like I had betrayed them. I tried to explain that I had savings, that I'd done some private consulting over the years and put it away for emergencies. I even started to say I would move out soon, give them back their space. Before I could finish, he cut me off, said good, The sooner the better. I glanced at Caleb, sweet Caleb, who used to leave notes under my pillow when he was little. He didn't say anything, just kept staring at his plate like the salad had answers. Then he spoke, but it wasn't comfort. He just said maybe I needed rest, that maybe slowing down was a good idea for someone my age. It felt like the ground gave out a little. I wasn't angry. I just felt like I'd slipped into a version of my life where I didn't belong anymore. I nodded, kept my voice steady, and said thank you. Then I began clearing the dishes. They didn't stop me. No one offered to help. The sound of the faucet running was the only thing I remember after that. I stood there washing plates I had chosen for a meal I had made, in a house that no longer felt like it had a place for me. After everything was put away, I walked quietly to the spare room. No one asked where I was going. No one followed. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the framed print on the wall. It was a quote about family and belonging. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if I'd hung it up or if it was always there. Either way, it didn't feel true anymore. The house was still when I came downstairs. Morning light spilled over the marble floor, soft and golden. I moved slowly, careful not to wake anyone, though I wasn't sure they would have cared if I had. I opened the fridge and reached for the oat milk. I was going to make porridge, something warm to start the day, something that felt like home, even if nothing else did anymore. I hadn't even turned on the stove when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Jenna, Luke's wife. She stood at the edge of the kitchen, arms folded, voice tight. "You're still here," that's all she said, like I'd overstayed a welcome that had never really been offered. I gave her a tired smile, said I was just making something light, and then heading out to check a few apartment listings. Her eyes scanned the room like I'd invaded it. She said she thought it was clear last night that I was leaving. Before I could answer, Emily walked in with her mug, Caleb's wife. She didn't greet me. She just said if I stayed, there wouldn't be enough room when she gave birth. Jenna nodded like it was obvious. She added that postnatal care required certified help now, not just anyone. Her words were smooth, casual, but cut like glass. I stood still, one hand on the counter, gripping the wood. Emily joked half under her breath that I probably still believed in boiling herbs and hand-washing diapers. I didn't laugh. I don't think she expected me to. Then Jenna said it. If I wasn't going to help physically, maybe I could support them financially. They were hiring a nanny. 4 weeks would run about $3,500. The quiet around us suddenly felt like something else. Not peace, just absence. I looked at them, not with anger, just with a hollow kind of clarity. They didn't want me there. They didn't want my hands or my time. They just wanted the money. I nodded slowly and said I understood. I told them I wouldn't get in the way. I said I'd figure out my own housing. Jenna flipped open her planner, already moving on. Emily sipped her coffee like we were making small talk and not drawing the final lines of a family. I placed the pot of oats back in the fridge without a word, walked upstairs without making a sound. Even the staircase felt foreign under my feet. In the room, I sat on the bed and looked at the suitcase I hadn't unpacked in weeks. It was still sitting there in the corner like it had known before I did. That morning wasn't loud, no shouting, no final argument, just the softest, coldest way to say you're not wanted. And for the first time, I believed them. I closed the door gently behind me, careful not to let it make a sound. The room felt like a space between worlds, not quite mine, but not theirs either. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and pale, like it hadn't realized anything had changed. I sat on the floor beside the bed, legs crossed like I used to when I helped the boys build their Lego sets. I reached under the frame and pulled out the old wooden box. The paint was chipped at the corners, its metal latch cool to the touch. Inside, the letter waited, folded neatly, its edges yellowed with time, but the handwriting was still as sharp as I remembered. Claire Huntington's name sat at the bottom like a quiet anchor. Claire had been my mentor during my early years at the foundation. Sharp-eyed, composed, the kind of woman who never raised her voice because she didn't need to. She'd seen something in me long before I knew how to see it in myself. I remembered the day she called me into her office. I thought I'd made a mistake. Instead, She told me she'd been watching the way I worked, that I handled numbers like I handled people, with honesty, with care. When she passed, no one mentioned me at the funeral. I sat in the back, head low, hands folded. I thought that was the end. But a week later, a letter came, from her private attorney. The box had been delivered with instructions. In it, a copy of her handwritten will. Claire had left me nearly half her personal shares in the Huntington Legacy Fund. The amount totaled just over $9.2 million. I remembered reading it over and over, not because of the number, but because of the reason. She trusted me, not just with her money, but with the idea of legacy. Back then, I told myself I'd use the money for Luke and Caleb, save it for when they were ready, help them buy homes, start businesses, raise their children with security. I never touched a cent. I filed the documents, set up a trust, and let it sit in silence. Now, sitting on the floor with that letter in my lap, I finally saw it for what it was. Not just a gift, a reminder that someone, once, had seen the real me and thought I was worth something. I wasn't angry. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted that clarity to stay with me. I'd spent so many years trying to earn love by giving, hoping that sacrifice would be enough. But some people don't recognize love until it's gone. Some people only begin to see you once you've stopped asking to be seen. I looked at the letter and traced her name with my fingertip. Claire had always told me that silence can be powerful, but only when it's chosen, not when it's expected of you. I sat there for a long time, thinking, not about what I'd lost, but about what I'd let go of trying to be. All those years I measured my worth in how much I could help, how much I could provide. And now, when I had more than enough to offer, they still didn't want me. Not really. Not unless I stayed useful. I folded the letter and placed it back in the box. I stood slowly, steadier than I had felt in days. My heart didn't race. My chest didn't ache. It was just still. At the mirror, I caught my reflection. Not Luke's mom, not Caleb's babysitter. Just a woman with soft lines around her eyes and a life still her own. I smiled, barely, just enough to know I could. Then I whispered the words I hadn't allowed myself to say until now. They don't get to spend this. They don't get to spend me. Not anymore. I woke up before the sun. The house was quiet, shadows still resting along the hallway. I didn't turn on any lights. I packed only what mattered, a few changes of clothes, personal documents, and the wooden box that had waited patiently beneath my bed. I zipped the suitcase and sat still for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. There were no goodbyes, no last glances into rooms that once held pieces of my life, just one folded note left on the kitchen table. I've left, just as you wished. I didn't expect them to notice right away. That morning would begin like any other. They'd eat breakfast, check their phones, complain about work. It might take hours before someone realized I was gone. I called a taxi and stepped outside with my small suitcase. The air was cool and still, the kind that carries a softness just before dawn. I didn't look back. The driver asked for the destination, and I gave him an address in Northwood Heights, the part of the city where Claire had lived. It was quiet, clean, full of tall buildings with long shadows and lake views. The kind of place people assume belongs to someone else. The lobby of Hudson Crest was silent, polished, and expensive in that quiet way only time and wealth can make feel natural. I asked to view a listing on the 28th floor. The woman at the desk hesitated, asked if I had an appointment. I said no, but I'd like to tour it today. She raised her brow but called an agent, who arrived 10 minutes later with polished shoes and a clipboard. She glanced at my canvas tote and travel-worn coat, then asked gently if I was aware of the starting price. I nodded. $4.2 million. I'd like to see it anyway. We rode the elevator in silence. She spoke once, said this unit had been on the market just 2 weeks. Modern design, glass balcony, open kitchen, full lake view. The door opened to soft white walls, hardwood floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that stretched toward the water. I stepped in without hesitation, walked slowly to the glass, and looked out. The lake shimmered under morning haze. She asked if I had financing arranged. I opened my bag and handed her a notarized power of attorney, a statement of secured funds, and the name of my legal advisor. She scanned the documents twice before speaking again. "So you're paying in full?" I nodded once, "and I'd like to move in this week." Her expression changed, just slightly. Something in her posture shifted from formality to respect. She called her supervisor. I walked back to the window, let the light hit my face. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel like I needed to justify anything. This space wasn't too big. It wasn't too grand. It was just enough, and for the first time in years, it would be mine. When they returned with papers to begin the process, I signed calmly. No rush, no small talk, just clear decisions. That afternoon, I called my attorney from a bench outside the building. I told him to begin restructuring the trust, register a private management company, and purchase the unit under that entity. No ties to my name, not because I had something to hide, but because I was done explaining my worth. He paused for a long moment, then said, "So it's finally time you stopped being patient." I smiled and said, "Yes, it is." The letter went out 3 days after I moved in. A quiet envelope sent through my attorney's office, addressed to Luke and Caleb. The subject line was simple: notification of co-ownership rights and property oversight. Years ago, when my husband and I bought that house, we did it together. Even after the divorce, I retained 51% of the title. I never used it, not because I couldn't, but because I believed it was a gift, a home they could build their lives in, even after I was gone. Now, it was different, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I had finally understood that silence without respect only teaches others to ignore your worth. The letter explained that renovations must cease until a new agreement was signed. No unauthorized changes, no further construction without co-approval. It was written in legal terms, but the meaning was personal. That same morning, I sent 2 short emails, one to Jenna, one to Emily. I wrote that I would no longer be covering nanny expenses. I wished them well in selecting someone who matched their needs and their budget. Nothing cold, just clear. I also let Caleb know I wouldn't be contributing to their home renovations anymore. Both messages ended the same way. "I trust you'll find a sustainable financial path, the way all adults eventually must." I didn't expect a thank you. I didn't expect understanding, but I wanted it on record. They would no longer spend what I had given so freely. From what my attorney later told me, Luke was stunned when the letter arrived. He called 5 times. I didn't answer. Later that evening, they all had dinner together. I wasn't there, of course, but I imagined the conversation. April probably mentioned the renovation deposit. Jenna would have been furious about the nanny. Luke would have gone quiet, scrolling his phone. And Caleb, as always, would have stared at his plate. At some point, one of them would have asked, "What happened? Why the sudden change?" I could almost hear the answer Luke gave. She once told me, "You can hurt me, but don't make me feel invisible." After that, I think the room went still. It wasn't anger I wanted to leave behind. It was accountability, a record of all the things I once did with love that had been mistaken for obligation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't cut them off. I just stopped letting them spend pieces of me like I had no limit. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for doing it. The plates were already set, water glasses filled. The dining room lights cast their usual soft glow, warm against the early evening dim. The chair at the end of the table was pulled out, same as always. No one said anything about it. Maybe they didn't notice, or maybe they did but didn't know what to do with the space she used to fill. Caleb passed the breadbasket to Luke without looking up. Jenna commented on the weather, her voice too bright for the room. Emily nodded along, folding her napkin into smaller and smaller squares. When the casserole was served, April looked up halfway through a sentence. She turned slightly toward the empty seat and asked, "Mom, do you want?" Her voice caught just before the sentence finished. She didn't try again. No one corrected her. No one laughed it off. Luke picked up his fork and set it down again. The scraping sound seemed louder than it should have. Caleb chewed slowly, staring at nothing. The chair stayed empty, untouched. as if still holding the shape of someone they didn't know how to miss until she was gone. The silence wasn't peaceful. It sat between them, dense and hard. Emily reached for the fruit bowl and then stopped. Her hand hovered, like she was waiting for someone to remind her to use the small knife. No one did. Jenna took a sip of water and didn't say anything else. Luke pushed his food around on his plate. Caleb finally looked at the chair. He opened his mouth but closed it again. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been shown. It wasn't her voice they missed. It was the quiet she used to carry, the kind that held everything together. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the lights dimmed, no one pushed the chair back in. It stayed where it was, slightly turned, slightly open, like it still waited for her. And in that space, none of them could name what was missing, but all of them could feel it. The conference room smelled faintly of pine polish and paper. I arrived early, sat with my folder in front of me, and let the silence settle. The table stretched long and clean between us, as if it could buffer everything we had left unsaid. Luke came in first, stiff-backed, jaw tight. Caleb followed, shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes flicking from the floor to the walls, but never to me. Jenna and Emily took the seats beside them, arms crossed, expressions composed in that way people wear when they think they still have the upper hand. My lawyer began with the basics: the house title, the frozen renovations, the reassessment of co-ownership rights. I let him speak without interruption. There was no need to repeat what was already documented. When it was my turn, I opened the folder and placed a financial summary in front of them. A clean spreadsheet, 5 years of support, tuition assistance, medical expenses, interest-free loans, down payments, birthday gifts, holiday travel. $287,000. Itemized, quiet, clear. No one spoke for a long moment. Caleb's gaze finally met mine, and for a second I saw something flicker. Not defiance, not anger, just a trace of shame. Luke leaned back. His voice was low but defensive. You didn't have to stop everything. If there were misunderstandings, we could have talked about it. I kept my voice even. I'm not here for revenge, but I'm also not here to be used again. Jenna's mouth tightened. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. Emily looked down at her lap. Luke pressed on. You cut us off, just like that. I raised a hand gently. Don't. The room went still. I took a breath and continued. I didn't cut you off. You did that when you decided I no longer had value, when you looked at me not as a mother, but as an expense. No one interrupted. I laid the property deed on the table. This house, still under my name, 51%. That's enough for control, and I intend to use it. Caleb's voice cracked when he finally spoke. You're kicking us out. I looked at him carefully. The same boy who once sat beside me while I folded laundry, telling me about science fairs and group projects. I didn't want to be harsh, but I needed him to understand. I once begged for a room in that house, a corner, a little piece, and you nodded while they pushed me out. My throat tightened, just for a second. I swallowed it down and kept going. So no, I'm not kicking you out. I'm reclaiming the part of me I gave away too easily. My lawyer took over then, explained that if no financial arrangement was reached in 14 days, I would assume full operational oversight. Temporary possession was on the table. No dramatic gestures, just the next legal step. Luke opened his mouth, then closed it again. Caleb stared down at the table. Jenna tapped her nail against the armrest. Emily's lips moved slightly, as if mouthing words she couldn't find out loud. I stood slowly, folder in hand. At the door, I paused and turned. I used to ask for acknowledgement through love. Today, I ask for it through facts. Then I walked out. The sound of the door clicking shut was soft, but it echoed all the way home. The mornings were quiet in a way that felt new. I made coffee without anyone waiting for it. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. I read by the balcony, watched the light shift across the hardwood. Some days I answered emails. Most days I didn't. I had nothing urgent to prove. I started writing, not a book, not a journal, just small things. Sentences that lived in my head until I gave them a place to land. One evening, I opened my old social media account. I hadn't touched it in years, but a question had been sitting with me for days. So I wrote it, plain and clear. If I had no money, would you still want to call me Mom? I didn't expect answers. I didn't want them, really. But putting the question out there felt like a release. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. There was a name at the gate, Luke. He didn't ring. He didn't call. He just left a letter. Inside was one line. Mom, what did you used to want before all of this? I read it more than once. I sat with it in the quiet. Then I opened a new post and began to write. I used to want to be called Mom with love, not duty. I wanted to eat with people who wanted me there, not out of habit. I used to hope someone remembered my birthday because they cared, not because I'd sent them a check. I paused. Then I wrote the last line slowly, knowing it was the only one that mattered. But today, I only have one question to ask in return. If I had no money left, would you still want to call me Mom? I didn't send it back to Luke. I posted it. No names, no tags, just the words. I didn't check for likes. I didn't wait for a reply. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to be heard. The letter from my attorney arrived on a Wednesday. A simple envelope, nothing urgent, but it carried a weight I felt in my chest. It was time to discuss estate planning. I sat by the balcony that afternoon, legal pad on my lap, pen resting between my fingers. The city moved below, but up here, everything was still. I started with the easy parts: emergency contacts, medical directives. Then I paused at the section marked beneficiaries. I didn't write Luke's name. I didn't write Caleb's either, not out of anger, not even out of grief. Just a quiet understanding that this was no longer their legacy. Instead, I named something new: the Quiet Mothers Fund, a small grant foundation for women who had been pushed out, not by strangers, but by the people they once sacrificed everything for. It wasn't meant to be large. It didn't need to be. A single year of rent, a bridge between silence and new beginning, something I wished had existed when I was standing in the doorway with nowhere to go. I smiled while I filled out the paperwork. Not a bitter smile, a soft one, the kind that comes when you stop waiting to be chosen. That night, I cooked for myself. Nothing elaborate. Roasted vegetables, warm rice, a bit of salmon with lemon. The kind of meal I used to make for everyone, only now, just for me. The kitchen was quiet, the way I liked it. A small lamp cast a golden glow across the counter. My radio played one of Claire's favorite sonatas. I carried 2 plates to the table, one for me, one across from mine. Not because I expected company, not because someone was coming, but because I had spent a lifetime making space for others, and now I was learning how to make space for myself. I poured a glass of water, sat down. The wind stirred the curtains gently. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I didn't feel small. I felt full. I looked at the second plate and didn't feel sad. I felt whole, because it wasn't a symbol of someone missing. It was a sign I had returned to myself. I picked up my fork and began to eat. The food was warm, the room was calm, and for the first time, peace wasn't something I hoped for. It was something I lived in.